City Hall.
We'll make it official.
No, that's wrong. That thing's closed.
That's wrong.
It's 7 o'clock.
Okay, it's called to order. Take the roll. I guess I will do it, since Mr. Harris is not here. Commissioner Burke?
Here.
They're not in the right order. I remember everybody in the order. Yeah. Commissioner Elias?
Here.
Commissioner Cook?
Present.
Commissioner Dastra?
Here.
Commissioner Feldman?
Here.
Commissioner Ruffo?
Here.
Commissioner McGrann?
Here.
Commissioner Barber?
Here.
Okay, so, and me, I'm here, so we have a quorum. First order is approval of the minutes from January 24th. I sent them out about a week ago. Hopefully you had a chance to review them. Are there any corrections or changes to be made?
I was just thinking they should have said more. I think each commissioner spoke why they were voting to approve to move to the next step. And that was not in the minutes, but I think that's okay. I mean, that was just my opinion. I'm okay with
Okay, well, that's up to you, so,
it. I'm okay with it.
okay. Is there any objection to approving the minutes as written? Hearing none, the minutes are approved. Report from me, first of all, thank you to those who have come to the meeting this evening. It's a little less crowded than it was last time, but understandably so. We have made a bit of a change in the agenda, so suggestion was made to add public comment both at the beginning and at the end. Well, today, I'm not sure that will really make that much difference. This is more of the planning for moving forward. As we do start negotiating details, I can see why the public would want to speak up at the beginning of what's going on and then be able to comment on what we've done during the evening afterwards. So there is that's one change in there. Any member of the public who does want to speak, I just remind you, it is being live streamed. You are being recorded. And when you do get up to speak, give us your name and the street in which you live. First thing I do want to comment about is, as you look around the table, you notice Mr. Reddick is not here this evening. He had some, I assume, minor surgery.
Yeah.
And just for all of us, we wish him well and speedy recovery and hope to see him in a couple of weeks.
He has to lie still for 5 days, and if you know Fred, that's worse than the surgery.
I can't even imagine sitting still for 5 hours, let alone 5 days. The other comment I have, I was contacted by Bob May. He's the director of Lancaster EMS, and he wanted to meet with me. So he and I sat down at 8 o'clock Monday morning, which I'm not a fan of 8 o'clocks, period. But the issue that he wanted to discuss was that as we move forward and we start talking about public safety, that there's an assumption of public safety is fire and police. And he would like to remind us that it is also EMS. They are a private company, but he does want to be considered, he just wants the opportunity for Lancaster EMS to be considered. He offered that when we get to that point, or at any time, we would like him to come in and speak, he will give us his 15-minute presentation on what he thinks is important and what we should be doing. And I said I would leave that up to the commission and let him know. That's really, just trying to think, that's really all I have. So moving on to public comments. Is there any comments from the public?
Judah Hoover from Lancaster County Association of Realtors, just here to monitor, and we're looking to just get more involved and just monitor, pay attention, and everything like that. Appreciate the work you guys are doing. You'll see. We want to be able to inform our members as to what's actually going on, good, bad, and indifferent. So we're going to try and just obviously do watch it more. That's why you're seeing me here today. Appreciate you guys.
What was your name again?
Judah Hoover, Judahhoover. Not an Lancaster City resident, but obviously as the city goes, so goes the county. I'm a county resident.
Yep. Okay, thank you. Any other comments from the public? Yes, from the fourth
Mr.
estate.
One United Lancaster, just really a point of order. Doesn't seem like you guys are amplified the way you are when you're up on the dais and having a devil of a time hearing you. So please speak up and, make a little more effort to speak, do it distinctly if you would.
Thanks.
Without getting feedback.
Might have to have the projector on to make that happen. Well, that's gonna happen. Could someone say something to?
Hello? Hello? Can
Hello,
you hear
Amy.
me? Hi, Elizabeth. Darlene, say something. Your voice is kind of low.
Hello.
Yeah, so those mics can we pick it up on the stream?
Do you think maybe
I'll bring one or two of those down.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay.
You can open this.
Well, And I have very little voice today, so I apologize for that. This is about as loud as I'm going to be able to get. Any other comments from the public? Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to the main point of the meeting tonight is review of the study phase and planning for the charter drafting process. So I've discussed with PEL, they're going to make a short discussion about what we should be doing, how to go forward. Thank you. How we're moving forward. We sent out a document on the home rule charter drafting, which they will discuss, and then we'll take it from there.
Thank you. Really, the main thought we had was that the commissioners should maybe discuss each in turn what you decided and you learned, or what you think you've learned from the study phase, and how that's going to apply while it's fresh in your mind to the process of charter drafting. And that was part of the idea behind this, essentially a template of a sample code, a sample charter, so you could see the kind of topics that would have to be covered, and whether or not your experience with the city study phase gave you opinions on what could be kept, modified, or changed. And in a simpler way, once you do that, I'd like to explain, before you do that rather, there's a couple processes to do a charter from draft, from scratch, or from the model you have now. One of the ways to do a charter is to simply start with a clean sheet of paper and go through literally piece by piece by piece. That could be useful when there is a smaller form of government that is needs, for whatever the reasons are for home rule. Why would you decide go from scratch? A lot of counties do that because a county government's a little more complicated from a home rule point of view, and there's a lot of things that could be changed and modified in the county form of government because of the way counties in Pennsylvania operate. Local government, it's pretty much very similar. Local government services, delivery of services, citizens' needs. So the other way to look at a charter drafting is to consider it as a whole piece now in place. It's operating, it's providing services, it's proved itself. The system works every day, whether it's transparent enough, efficient enough, effective enough, is the questions you have to answer. And from that point of view, it's almost like a clay model that's pretty representative of what the subject is, and you as sculptors decide to add or subtract to make the model more in your likeliness of what you learned from the study phase. We've been preparing a document, it's been being reviewed by the chairman and the solicitor. We'll use it in the next meeting, because I don't think it's appropriate for this meeting. And it will walk you through the third-class city optional plan A with a decision column. And that is where you will say, okay, we learned that this position does this process does that. Do we keep that process? Do we change that process? And how do we change that process? And that will lead to a discussion among commission members and meeting after meeting as you refine what you have already. And those are the two choices that you should at least rely on today for charter drafting. And I think the way you get to that choice is by discussing what you've learned as to how effective the current form of government is to provide services in its structure. Okay, not in its ability and resources, but how you see it operating today, the council of government, the mayor as part of the government, those factors, the departments. You've learned all those. It's basically the optional Plan A form, and I think Ms. Byrd asked for a copy of that because it was Section 4, Article 4 of the thing we gave out in July. So I think that's the basis for how we want to do a charter drafting process. So as you go through it, Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure how you want to handle it, if they want to take turns and just discuss.
I'm fine with that. If you want to go around the table, I can either go first or last.
I think you should go first.
Of course you do. So close. What I found over the last 6 months, first, just understanding how the city does work. I have learned that as it comes to understanding government, there are people on this commission who know far more about how government works than I do. I've started to come to the terms with what I do is I can run a meeting. Whether or not what's right, what's wrong, a lot of this was very, very new to me, the specifics. What was really interesting, though, was the couple of meetings we had with the other mayors. And mainly not to say, oh, this is really great, we should do this, was that they all came from seemed to come from a starting point of a dysfunctional government. There wasn't any specific, it said, oh, well, Hazelton did this, we need to do that, or Altoona doesn't like this, we should do it. But just that their governments weren't working. They were in bankruptcy, they were broke. And we have the opportunity to step in and take what is a very functioning government, a functioning city, and I think mainly tweak the edges to bring it, into the 21st century. The plan that we work under was written in 1957. Actually started writing a column that I thought would address this. Keep in mind, Eisenhower was president and Perry Mason had just debuted on TV in 1957. Eisenhower's not president anymore, and I will say Perry Mason is still on TV, but the point is, and no, Tony was not alive.
Yeah.
Before he says it, and neither was I. But the point is, we are a functioning city. One of the things I took from each of the mayors is kind of a surprise that we were doing this. Their thought was, well, what's the problem? Where's the collapse? Where is, the creditors breathing down your neck? Say, they're not there because we've done a good job, but we can do better. So my point is, this is what I took from the last 6 months. As was pointed out, I like the idea of saying we have a charter. It works for what is meant for, but we could also bring it up to 2024, and that's the approach we should probably be taking. Who would like to go next?
Is this supposed to be a discussion about the form of government?
I think it's mainly just why are we here and what do we want? What is our goals for moving forward? From there, we can start even discussing, the planning for specific forms of government, maybe next time.
Next time.
Okay.
I mean, you can just obviously discuss what you think in the form of government that you learned as a fault or a favor. But as far as the actual decisions and discussions, I think that needs to be more structured, so we can work our way through it, top down.
Thanks.
No, it is.
But I think it's almost like an alignment of your opinions. You had a chance last time to talk about your reasons for voting, how you did. Now it's what did you learn while it's still fresh in your mind?
15.
So sort of expanding upon maybe why we voted. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll just go since I'm talking. I just think I agree with Brian. We have a functioning government. We're being proactive so that we're not dealing with a challenge in bankruptcy and trying to scramble. So I think that's one reason that we're here. And then the other thing that I heard from both the department heads and former mayors is that this is a good thing to explore. And so I just think it makes sense. I don't really know what else to say.
Yeah, so I obviously wasn't here last time. I would have voted to move forward, but I do understand that our charter works, but one of my concerns, bluntly, is a concept known as the tyranny of the majority. Don't take the word tyranny much to heart. That's just literally what it is called. We live in a city that has a 60-20-20 split, essentially, of political ideology. And on top of that, we as a community are not deaf to the fact there have been conversations about representation in government. I'm not so concerned necessarily about some of the more detailed powers of local government, although I would like to expand on some of those. But my primary concern has been the makeup of government, because I feel that certain residents, even though, I think we can all come to the table and agree that the charter functions, that opinion is not necessarily shared in some circles. Like, some people in the community genuinely feel like, no, this isn't working for me. Like, this form of government is not not this form of government, but this government doesn't necessarily encapsulate my values or even hear them. So moving forward through the process, that's my biggest concern, is how can we make a charter that, I hear you when you say bring it up to 2024, but I'm kind of thinking, like, what can we do to make sure that this charter lasts for like the next century or more? Like, what can we do so that maybe we can even in the future see this process revisited, so that the people of Lancaster City, as we change and shift, feel comfortable in the charter that is written for them.
Thank you. Who wants to go next?
Cool. I mean, as I've thought about it, I think, I've had lots of anecdotes just about, I feel like our form of government works, our government works. Not sure it works as well for all as it does for some. And I think I've been thinking a lot about why is that? And I think a lot of it is government running a city is complicated, and there's a lot of stuff that has to get done. And, I think about, some of you, I came to city council the other night talking about, some challenges that I know my neighbors have had, which is just navigating the permitting process to do a couple small projects at their house. And they're new to Lancaster. They don't really know the stuff, but it's hard. And, they have some professionals involved. They have their architect and general contractor, but just getting from start to finish is hard. But the way that gets solved requires more staff, which requires more funding. So it's like, it would be great to have some sort of for people, who have any sort of a challenge, someone to sort of lead them through the process or teach them how to navigate this for themselves. But, we don't have the personnel to do that. And we don't have the budget to add the personnel to do that. So, I think, that's one of the things I've been thinking about a lot is how do we, I think that the things that the city does for the residents of the city, they do well. And they do with the best of intentions. But I think when people are trying to figure out when they're dissatisfied or frustrated, how do they change that? I'm not sure people know where to go, and I don't think that that's intuitive. And I don't know how to make it into it. And then to sort of keep rambling a little bit, then it's like, so then during the 6 months, I'm like, okay, well, where do we fit into that? And so there were a couple of moments where I was, tempted to get into the weeds of that. And then it's like realizing this isn't meant to be a document that gets into that level of detail. This is meant to be something that, speaks in broad terms, that makes things possible, and then leaves it to, ordinances and, elected officials and city hall staff to actually, take that and implement it. So I've sort of made a little bit of a circle where, at different points I was like, well, how can we embed some solutions to some of these things into the charter? But we shouldn't do that. We can't do that. We shouldn't want to do that. But then I'm like, okay, how do we? So I'm not sure I'm going to come to a tidy conclusion in my remarks, other than to say, that's what's on my mind is, and then all that is, although it does come back to, how do we, arrive at a more sustainable funding model that then does, give the city the tools and resources, and then also, some accountability to start to work on putting these things in place. So that when people are frustrated, there's a way for that to become known to city officials, and for them to recognize, oh, we need to do better here, and to actually then have the ability and the resources to figure out how to do better. So I'll stop there.
Okay, agree and disagree. Number one, I was for moving on with the charter for the simple fact that there are things that don't work well. And I think that's why we were looking at the charter. I read the book, the Home Rule Charter book. A lot of things that you keep saying we can't do, I don't see that in there. This charter, we can do what we want to do. It might not be wise when we look into it to dig into the weeds, but I think that's my responsibility as a commissioner, to find out why is it that people can't get where they want to get. We do have employees, and there should be some kind of way that they're not running into them roadblocks. I know years ago we talked about Mayor Gray and the other mayors that were here. His term was a friendly city, friendly user city. And that's what the city became, a friendly user. So a neighbor that didn't know the ropes coming into the city was able to have access to the city. So I think there are things we can change. There are things, and like I said, I come to a lot of the city council meetings a lot to see what's going on. I interact with all levels of the city government, whether it's doing a project for planning to the historic district, and we got reports from city council, and from the president of city council and from the mayor, and but the departments don't work as good as it's wrote out in paper. And if you're in there and you're involved, whether you're the architect trying to deal with the city planning and everything, so I'm hoping there's things that we can do. I'm really looking at the commissions. I really feel that the commissions need representation. I looked at the Home Rule Charter. I didn't see where there was anything that we're not able to say a commission should be made up of, X amount of people or people from all representations. There's nothing stopping us from doing that. I looked over the budget. When I come to the budget hearing, I didn't come this year, but I watched it live stream. And to go over that budget in one day for a long day, long hours, there's no reason that's not broke down into quarters. I think that's something that we could put into the charter to say. It's not saying that the process doesn't work, but it needs to be easier for residents like myself and others to be able to understand and have input. I also attend some of the county commissioners meetings, and some of the things they do about their budget and all the information they give, we don't get that. If we don't ask those questions, we never know. So I think I'm really hoping that this charter is going to address a lot of issues. I know you don't want to go into the weeds, but I think we need to go over the charter, look at this section and say, hey, we're fine with that, skip it. Let's go to the next one. Okay, someone has an issue with this. Well, let's discuss it. I'm hoping we're not pinpointing just the concerns that were mentioned for the homeroom, like that earned income tax as a reason of just funding. That was one thing. And I understand that. But there's also another aspect of that charter book that we got that says that we should be looking into, and we didn't do that. So I think whether that affects the form of government, I'm not here to say I want this, I want that. I don't know yet. But I'm hoping we're not eliminating those discussions. So that's just how I feel. So.
Agree. I think that the process itself was very interesting. I thought the mayors explaining their form of government, it was all quite eye-opening, and it was a great process. And if we are at this point, I think what I would like to see is I would like to see things more detailed. I would like us to kind of not just piecemeal or whatever, but like go detail and go through the weeds. I would really like to proceed in that way.
So I voted yes to write a charter because most of what we learned through about the government and how it runs, and because of what we learned about the other cities, like Brian said, the other cities that have had turmoil or something wasn't going right, a lot of things weren't going right. So they had to go to a charter. It was their only option. From the beginning, hearing about a charter for Lancaster, the only thing I could hear, the only thing most people were talking about was the tax, the
Earned
income tax. Thank you, the earned income tax. And in viewing so many of the components of a charter, there's so much more to it. And similarly to what Ms. Bird is saying, you know, there's a lot of things that we have the opportunity to address, adjust for 2024 and beyond. Having had the mayors here when we did and hearing them talk about how they couldn't come to the conclusion, or they didn't decide on a home rule charter. It was not, maybe it just wasn't the time. And maybe now is the time. And to be able to learn what I have about our government, learn more about our government in such an intimate way, being a commissioner, I appreciate that I'm able to have that insight to each component that we're going to write. And the other thing is, because we have a responsibility to educate our community, I hope to see more of our community to come out, to hear all of this, to watch on live stream, to ask their questions so we can address them. And as you said, we're not going to have 100% approval. But I'm concerned about our communities. So I would be thinking about the city. I've lived in every quadrant of the city over my life. And I see how it's changed dramatically. And I think having the opportunity to write a charter and go, each section at a time, that we all have our time to put that input. I think that whatever I'm part of to present for city residents who may have come to me already, who want to come and don't know what this process is about. I just hope that more residents come out, that we can answer questions, that we could be writing the charter for the community that makes sense with all of us and all of our concerns, and then we'll give them the opportunity to vote on it. That's the point to get to see if that's what the community wants. So I feel like we're going to have to be at our very best in writing this charter. And again, I think it's monumental because we're just at a particular time that we're trying to write a charter to, from what I understood, prevent going into bankruptcy. So I hope I hope that we don't have to get to that. And I hope the charter and how we have the opportunity to write it is the answer.
Heard a lot of things that I agree with from really everyone. I do fundamentally agree that the city works quite well today. I've lived in Bethlehem, Harrisburg, and Lancaster has far and away, head and shoulders, better level of service than either of those similarly situated cities. And I think people know that in Pennsylvania, that the standard is quite high. But I don't disagree that more can be done, better can be done. And I think the reason the tax discussion, the fiscal cliff discussion is so front and center is because when I hear about some of the challenges that people encounter, the solution to that, in my opinion, is not subtraction, it's additive. And to give you just a perfect example of this, I'm not a huge historic preservation person. I'm very kind of like live and let live. But I was disappointed that the Guns N' Hauer Bakery was not able to be saved. And what was basically said, if you read the newspaper about how that had to be handled, is that the city has limited resources and it focuses its inspection activities on the health and safety of its residents as opposed to commercial properties. And you know what? If I was the chief executive, I'd do the exact same thing every single time. Because I think that is the hard choice you have to make in leadership to protect the health and safety of your residents. That's your first priority. The solution to the problem isn't one in which you take away resources. If you want to not find yourself in that situation, you have to be additive of resources to have the staff to do the inspections and result in a different outcome. That's why it's important to me, or at least a good example of it. I've also been spending a lot of time looking at the other charters that have been circulated to try and see what's in there, what have other cities that have gone this way done. And I see a lot that I think people would be interested in, covering a lot of different areas. I was thinking about what was said in the last meeting about the importance of fostering trust with city residents. And I was hoping to talk a little bit later about this, but I'll just bring it up now because I thought it was a good example. I was listening to an interview with a reporter about a situation in Du Bois where they had a pretty scandalous action by a city official. And the reporter was talking to the city of Pittsburgh's ethics board. And I thought to myself, well, that's very interesting. They have an ethics board, which has its own scope of authority for enforcing the State Ethics Act and potentially expanding upon it. And sure enough, if you look at some of these charters, that's something that's available to us. Yep. I think it's a trust-building measure in its a positive good on its face, but also I believe in the concept of what's being promoted there, and I think that's an opportunity for us. So I guess I'm saying I'm interested in this. I was also looking, though, at things in the charters, if you read them, where decisions were made that clearly had a negative impact on the cities when they changed, or at least you can tell in their actions that they did. You can put together a charter which actually really does leave the city in a worse place than it was before. I think it was Allentown started off with a city charter. Allentown is a large city. I think it used to be even larger, but it's like the third largest city in the state or something like that, maybe fourth. It's in a larger metro area than Lancaster, Pennsylvania. They put, I think, in their charter a residency requirement for the department heads and then removed it later. If Allentown cannot enforce effectively a residency requirement on its department heads, frankly, I think that Lancaster can do that. And they took it out because they thought that it was hindering their ability to operate. And so my point in saying that is that when the other mayors, when the current staff of the city, I think Douglas said there was kind of nothing in the way that the city's constructed now, for the most part, that he felt was kind of poorly situating the city. When they say that, like, I do take that pretty seriously. And so if there's a kind of government structure change that we want to do, I am taking a conservative approach to understanding its value to the city, because we're seeing, if you look at the other charters, places where people made a decision and then ultimately felt it wasn't in the best interest and actually set the city back, especially because we start from such a high floor.
I get the last comments, all right. One of the things that I think, is we're going through all this is really recognizing and understanding the high functioning of our current city. I mean, we've talked about this and experienced from some of the other mayors, whether it's a sense of surprise or whatever, that we're taking these steps now, but this is really in the best way, we're making proactive changes to an already highly functioning organization. And those proactive changes can create really phenomenal future opportunities for us to grow and improve. And I think one of the opportunities is to use this and understand the limitations that we have, and some of the greatest creativity can come out of certain levels of limitations. And that's what the city has been trying to function under for years, and we're just going to hopefully expand some of those practical limitations, because there's never any organization, whether it's a city, a household, a personal household, a school district, there's always going to be an ask for more. And that's just not sustainable under any circumstances. And so how do we find the best opportunity, the most creative solutions under any limitations that we create? And we've all found ways to do that in our personal lives, in our family lives, and in our business lives. And that's what the city is really dealing with. But how can we create the best opportunity for that? What I'm hoping that we can create is finding a way to create broad authority and a broad vision for what we hope for the city to be able to accomplish. And I think we have to remember that we're not writing policy. We're just creating governing principles, right? If we get down into creating policy, I think that's where some of the problems come in. And your example was great about like department's head having to live somewhere. I mean, the intention sounds great, but creating that level of policy just comes with so many different challenges and distractions to it. And being able to do all this in a way that engages the community, engages the population, engages the city residents in a way that they can really understand and appreciate what we're trying to do, but give it broad enough authority so that the real policy gets determined, not by us, but by the elected officials that are there to really determine what those policy structures are going to be, and to create them in a way that whatever we do is sustainable over a long period of time. And if we look at all the policy decisions that have been made by any governing organization, there's a lot of change involved with that. Mm-hmm. And I think we're looking to create something that has a lifespan of a greater sense that's really based on the principles that we're hoping to accomplish. I mean, the simplest things that we can look at that are really about how we govern, whether it's a United States Constitution or even a Pennsylvania state constitution, at a certain level, they're simple documents. And I think we have to keep that as kind of one of our guiding principles, is like, how do we keep this simple enough to create those guiding principles that are going to be determined by the policy and the other elected officials.
It's working. It doesn't matter which. I only need one. Thank you. I want to add one last comment, and then we'll move back, Mr. Cross. One of the things I heard, and what I got from a lot of you right now, the entire state is watching us. The fact that we are not in bankruptcy, that we're not, whether we're hurtling towards the cliff, we're not falling over it, and then what we can do. So as we move forward, we can expect others to copy us. So, if we create a great charter, suddenly Du Bois, the wonderful metropolis of Du Bois will jump in and say, hey, we want to copy this. We are setting a guide by doing something that really hasn't been done this way, or very, very rarely. So it's just something to keep in mind. Back to you.
Okay. I've attended every meeting, and I think what I heard was what I experienced, which is very good. Everybody seems to have an opinion, and that opinion will move us forward, especially when you're arguing over different items of the charter. The process we'd like to start next meeting will take the form of essentially starting at the very highest level, the governing body, what the governing body should look like, both in current state and what you think would be something to affect that structure based on what you learned, and move consecutively through that. Now, you're not going to move meeting by meeting. You're going to have several meetings in a row, I think, where you'll, especially the governing body, make up the mayor, the high-level legislative governing body balance, the mayor, administrator, all those balances. They're going to take several meetings, so don't feel frustrated. You can leave here with no clear path forward, think about it, work through it, and then listen to each other. My biggest experience with government study commissions is sometimes there'll be one loud voice and tries to run the room, or sometimes there'll be a variety of opinions with nothing to coalesce. So if you think there's an opportunity to change things and move forward, everything you decide here will be in the nature of compromise and in the nature of votes that guide. They're not votes that bind. And if you take a vote, it'll be more in the sense of consensus. The final vote, and really the only vote you're going to take, is the vote to approve a charter and a report to the citizens. And that will happen prior to the election that you want it to happen at. And that'll be your final report. So everything that we talk about between now and the final report will be in the nature of building consensus, understanding what you want to see in a charter, and what you think the citizens' needs are best answered by that charter. So that's kind of the process we want to follow.
Right, and I would also say that just because you make a decision about this one thing tonight, 2 weeks from now or a month from now, something else may trigger you to go back and say, well, that doesn't make sense in this thing. So that's okay too. You're not, like, if you take a vote on, 7 council members or something, whatever, and it disagrees with something else, you can go back and revisit. It's, as Jerry said, it's not until the final report that you have to come to a full consensus.
The further along you go, the narrower, like a funnel, the narrower you'll be, because you'll have major decisions behind you. And if you do have some sort of change of heart, it is going to require a lot of reworking. So you have to understand, if you win an argument or lose an argument, it may not be most productive to revisit it, but if you find that the prior discussions were not workable, it's important to revisit it. I'm not going to be a stenographer. I'm going to be devil's advocate. Don't take that personal. That tends to be the role of ours as staffers, based on our experience at other commissions, our experience with local government. So if we challenge an assumption, it's because we want you to think it through. Because what you think is true may not stand up to the model of the charter or what local government needs to function. So I don't take anything personal, and we won't take anything personal as we challenge each other, okay? There are certain overriding themes of a charter drafting that we have to address, and in the agenda is the standing committees. There are certain, and I'm not talking about, Brian and I were not talking about particular specifics, but there's a need for committees that exist all the time to answer a certain level of.
From the beginning.
Yeah, from the beginning, right, that, a guiding principle in a sense.
Yeah, we had discussed this, the idea of, just 2 right off the bat, is that we really need a public engagement committee, and to start, and a preamble committee. I know Mr. Barber recommended or requested that he be, work with the preamble. Nobody else weighed in on an opinion on that. So I think it actually would be a good time now to kind of set up a standing committee for these two at least. There is when we get into the ad hoc committees, there's one I want to add in, bringing up the idea of the ethics board, because it is different. It is something. So we may want to, while it's not a continuous aspect like the preamble will be, or public engagement, it's something you may want to get a head start on in investigating and how you want to do it. Yes.
Mr. Chair, on that matter, after thinking this through, based on what I heard in the last meeting, I reached out to the head of the Ethics Commission in the city of Pittsburgh. The person was very responsive and was interested in speaking with us if we were interested in speaking with them. And so I would like to arrange a discussion with the Pittsburgh Ethics Board, and I would welcome other commissioners to join me in that discussion. And I'd like to know who would like to join me in that discussion.
Okay, so we'll put that number 3. First, I think let's determine who first, the preamble committee. The preamble being basically our mission statement. Why are we doing this? What do we want to accomplish? What's the purpose of the charter? And while it seems like the simplest 75 words to write, I personally think it's probably the most difficult 75 words to write, because it has to really lay out everything just the way it is, without creating something that says, well, we want to do this, and then we don't do it. So I know, Mr. Barber, you wanted to be on that. Is there anybody else who would like to work with writing the preamble?
Sure.
Ms. Cook?
I'd like to be on that.
Mr. Dasher? I look for a minimum of 3. 3 works fine. Anybody else? Great. So what I would suggest, we now have the preamble committee. It will be up to the 3 of you to work out how to meet, how you want to approach this. Keeping in mind, we do have to have public meetings.
So the meetings of a committee, or a committee is an entity of the agency. You are the agency, so you're bound by the Sunshine Act just as the commission is. So certainly in each committee, we can get together and talk about how you want, when and where you want to meet, how you want to do that. We can create the format and make sure that you're in compliance with the Sunshine Act, which allows the public to participate and be part of it.
All right,
Can I make a recommendation? If it works with people's schedules, maybe the weeks in between when we don't have these meetings, perhaps is when the committee meetings can work. Just because then you've had the meeting, you can report back at the next all-commission meeting, so on and so on. But I know it may not work for everybody's schedules. Just something to consider.
Will the committees be taking minutes that they will pass out to the other commissioners?
The committees will be required to take
minutes, okay.
Because it is a Sunshine Act requirement.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
along those lines, logistically, will Bernie be at our disposal for those actions?
I doubt
I cannot guarantee that Mr. Harris will be able to attend all the meetings of committees, depending on when they're at, where they're at. What would be typical with committees is that one of you essentially keep notes of the meeting, and then Mr. Harris can work with you on assembling those into minutes in case that he's not able to be at all the meetings.
And my understanding is while the meetings must be public, they do not have to be live streamed.
Yeah.
That's just something we've done. That's nice, but it's not necessary. It's not in keeping with the letter of the law.
Correct. There is no mandate for live streaming. That's something the city does as a service for its city council meetings. And for these, I would suggest that for the committees, it's probably not an important matter to have them live streamed. I think it's more important for the committee members to be able to be communicating with one another, to come to some form of consensus as to language that's going to be coming back to the body as a whole, and that language would then be shared through the live stream with the broader audience as well.
And Barry, what kind of advertisement of those meetings needs to take place?
We'll need to legally advertise the date, time, location of the meetings. So
how far in advance?
By law, they have to be advertised a minimum of 24 hours in advance. We obviously want to give more notice of that. It takes more than 24 hours to put a legal notice in because it's usually about a 3 to 4 day lag time between the time the paper gets the ad and it's actually published. And then you're adding a 24-hour period minimum on top of that. So to the extent that your committees can have 8 to 9 days advance notice, it's easier for staff to get those advertised. To the extent that you know you want to advertise them and do them regularly for a period of time, we can do it in one ad. You can always cancel a meeting if you've concluded your work. So in other words, if you decide the preamble is going to take once a week or once a month for the process, we're looking at 4 of them. We can do that. If you're looking at doing 1 a week, we can do the ad to cover all of them, and you can always cancel a meeting. We would simply post that on our website, post it on our bulletin boards and other matters here.
So I want to jump in real quick and make a distinction. I will agree that maybe live streaming is not the most necessary thing. However, I do think it's important that we video and upload the meetings because we all have these things in our pocket these days. And frankly, I see this as a very historic process, and other cities may try to replicate it. We don't need to live stream them, I get that, and especially with the room, the technology's here, but I think it's very feasible for us to at least record the meetings and upload them. I understand we might be hashing through details and having conversations that could or could not be uncomfortable, but I think this is a very educational process as well, and it's important to at least have those records on file because minutes are great. They are the legal record, but nuance can often carry a lot of information in how something gets done.
So I'll just point out 2 quick things, not disagreeing or agreeing. I'm here to provide you with guidance. There's no guarantee you're going to have availability to this room for every one of those committee meetings. There's no guarantee you're going to have availability of city staff to staff and run those videos. So one of the things that I know you're going to be going through over the next 2 meetings is budget. If you're going to require staff and technology, you may have to consider that as part of your budget to make sure that it's done.
If to some extent I have to offer up my video equipment to at least put these things on a SD card, if we can't use our phones, really genuinely I'm speaking if we can at least set up our phones in some capacity or a cell phone that can just record something. I really don't think in the 21st century there's an excuse to not video something even if it's low quality.
I have a question, Barry. You mentioned we should have 8 to 9 days in advance to advertise the meetings.
If you're giving us that advance notice so that we can get the ads prepared.
I understand that part.
Yeah.
My question is that business days or?
No, that's regular calendar.
Okay. Thank you.
Newspaper, generally, it's about 3 or 4 calendar days in advance, depending on the day of the week. So on a Monday, if I submit an ad on a Monday, I can generally get the ad published on Thursday. It changes a little bit when you get into their business days as well, but for the most part, I need 3 days advance notice to get an ad in, and we have to prepare the ad, so we need a little bit of lead time, a day or 2 to do that. I'm suggesting 8 or 9 days gives us plenty of lead time if we want to add dates, change dates, because there'll be work going back and forth. But we've seen it already with your meetings where we've added something, taken something apart. So it's about being conservative. Can we get it done faster? Yes, but as a practice, you should think about 8 or 9 days getting us the information that far in advance.
And then I just wanted to sorry.
I just had a question. It kind of goes back to you, Tony. So were you suggesting that when we meet, that we record using our own phone or something? Or
I mean,
because I didn't think we could do that.
I don't know how Teams works, but Zoom you can record.
Okay.
So if Teams has a record function, somebody put their laptop, record it.
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, it's not that hard.
Yeah.
I will make one comment before, to risk being the dinosaur in the room. But the one who actually does teach technology classes, I'm not a fan of recording every word, every syllable, every item that ever happens in our lives. I personally find the constant surveillance state to be intrusive. And I worry a little bit that having a recording of every subcommittee meeting available in perpetuity would in effect stifle actually free discussions. The minutes are the minutes. So while if a committee wants to record their meeting, I'm not going to object to it. I think that the committee should have the ability to say, no, we want to meet and we don't want a camera on us the whole time. It shouldn't be forced.
So I just want to point out again so that everybody's clear. This is a choice, right? These are public meetings, so it's a choice whether you record for your purposes. In other words, the study commission. If a member of the public appears at the meeting and wants to record, they have a legal right to do so. Remember, again, just like you asked, is there anybody here that wants to record? So I just want to make sure that, again, as I've said, everything with Sunshine Act is about protecting you, to make sure that you comply with the law. And the second part is the purpose of the law is to make sure that you are following the level of transparency that the state legislature has set forth for you. There is no mandate that you record. There is a mandate that if somebody wants to show up at the meeting and record, they can do so. They just it has to be announced so everybody at the meeting knows it.
If somebody comes to the meeting, do we have to record though?
You don't have to, but they can.
If they want to.
Correct. So they could bring their phone and record. They just need to make an announcement that they're doing so.
Just do the best we can.
Yeah, like that's all I'm really saying is because that's how my ego's on display a little bit here. That's how these got in the city hall in the first place, is that I started coming to government meetings just as a bullheaded kid, essentially, and started doing that. So I think it's kind of backwards I understand that it's more comfortable to have these conversations without that level of documentation, but it just makes sense at this point to at least at a minimum, a low quality format to do it.
What was the second thing? We have a preamble committee. What was the next thing?
Oh, public engagement.
Public engagement.
Tim had a question.
Actually, just one.
Oh, yeah,
one-
Tim, yes.
Not a question, but just speaking as a reporter and as a member of the public, Solicitor Handwerker was referring to being able to schedule meetings 8 or 9 days in advance. The more that you guys can set a regular, predictable schedule going forward, I think the happier the media will be, and also the happier the public will be. People can schedule work their schedules in such a way that if they want to come, they're able to.
So second issue was public engagement. Obviously, Ms. Rufo has very, very much made it clear public engagement is an important, very important aspect. I would assume you would like to take a lead on this,
Sure.
okay? Who else would like to work with her on public engagement?
I would.
Okay, great.
What's it?
At risk of overworking myself, I feel like I've talked a lot about this. Like, I don't necessarily want to overwork myself.
We can invite you to the meetings if you can join us.
Yeah, it's like y'all know how I feel about some of this stuff. I feel like I'm
Yeah.
pretty open about that.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
I do think maybe a third member should be on the committee, though.
You want to be on public engagement?
I don't know what the other committees are. I don't want to,
Oh.
like Tony, if I knew what committees there were going to be, if it's just a choice of two,
No,
that's different. But
There's no limit. I mean, you can be on whatever. The others will come up as we need them.
Right. The other ones might come up as the topic needs it, and you may have too much to do at this regular meeting, so the chair might ask the committee to be formed, study a section, study a pros and cons, report back to the commission.
Yeah, I mean, we're report back, so if
That's-
you don't
yeah.
like some idea,
Yeah, but
I don't like that, Amy, you know.
they won't be long lived. They'll be more shorter, the
The other
engagements.
committees.
I'm happy to serve on the public engagement committee as well.
Okay.
And Barry, just to be clear, given the limitations of the use of this space or even other possible spaces in City Hall, these committee meetings could be held in other locations as long as there's accommodations for the public to
That's
access.
correct. That's
Much like our traveling things.
Yes.
If we said, hey, look, it's more practical for us to all meet in another location, we can do that as long as that's part of the advertisement
Yeah.
and the public is
I mean,
available.
There will be public spaces available at other city facilities. And they may be in this building, they may be in another public building of the cities. but you can choose as long as there's public accommodations. And the only reason I say this, depending on when you want to do a meeting,
Right.
we already have things that are scheduled, like planning commission, zoning hearings. As you're well aware, 31 commissions, boards and authorities. So, the room gets a lot of use.
Yeah.
And we've been very good at getting this board to be able to have access to this room when it needs it. But I just want to make sure that, if we have 5 committees working at one time and they all want to meet at the same time, they can't have this room at the same time either. So we just have to work through schedule.
Okay, so we have 2 standing committees formed, no objection. Ad hoc committees the idea is, as we need something, as Mr. Cross just said, when we're studying one aspect, it might be said, well, let's take this back and figure it out and work out the details. Should the dates be October, November, that sort of thing. And they will come up and go down as we need them. I do think forming an ad hoc committee for the Ethics Commission is something we probably could start today. I don't know if you would have any opinion, yes or no on that, or?
I think that's been expressed as an interest, and I think there's legal issues that, not so much legal issues, but the powers and duties of an ethics commission and how it fits into the regular government structure, who's appropriate to be on those kind of things. I think it's not a bad idea, because I think you need to start that.
It started early.
Get your information.
Yeah.
And I will say there will be some technical, legal, and drafting work with that if the commission goes that route, because again, there is a state act that prevails, just like we've been talking with home. You've been studying. There's certain acts that you can't get away from in a home rule. There is a state ethics act that all public officials are governed by. This ethics commission will be something that's worked separate from that, but has to be mindful of the law that's established by the State Ethics Commission. So there will be some technical work that would go with dealing with that.
Okay.
May I say, just for the record, that I am interested in public engagement, but of course, I'm not overworking myself, so I'll jump in.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
When I can.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I think. Just jump in.
Mr. Feldman, would you be willing to take the lead on that?
Yeah, and I'd like to, start by talking to Pittsburgh, who has one of these entities, and I welcome other commissioners to join.
You would like to be on this?
Yes.
Ms. Byrd? Anybody else?
Yeah, I'm in.
At risk of overextending.
No, because I'm not going to be on the public engagement one, but I do think the ethics is also of particular interest to me, and it's not a permanent committee, like it's not a standing committee, so I feel comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think when we set it up, we'll just say you're all welcome.
Yes,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah, good idea.
Keep in mind, all the committee meetings are public meetings, so
Anybody
can show up.
everybody, including all of you, can show up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, along similar lines, I was looking at the schedule, meeting 1, meeting 2, meeting 3, going on down the line. Generally, I don't have issues with that. What I will say is that the other thing I feel as though we need to get started on is the financial component of what a home rule charter would include. The financial component, budget and finance, would involve inputs that are needed beyond what we kind of in a vacuum can come up with. That means we need information from the Lancaster County Tax Bureau. We need information from the city of Lancaster, and we have to start that sooner rather than later. And I just would like to see this body get going on it and set a committee to get going on it.
I agree, yeah.
Okay, so
Makes sense
there's
to
a
me.
request for creating a financial committee. I assume there are 2 people who have expressed an interest. Or
I'm interested in that.
Yeah, I'm interested in that.
anybody else?
I think I can be interested in the finances.
I
Definitely.
would have been surprised if you had not, so.
I like how you
We can
phrased
do a
that.
daytime meeting if it works.
Now, in each,
John and Darlene?
and Darlene, In each case, the committee will choose their chair. So, just I ask to take a lead, and everything would be, you decide who actually wants to speak for the committee and so on.
So, clarification question, if I may.
Yeah, we're supposed to
Is
try
this
to
a
avoid.
committee to study
Yeah, you
the
need to speak at the
commission's own finance and budget?
No.
Or to gather information about city finances for the purpose of crafting?
I think it's the best one.
City finances.
30 years from now.
Okay.
What did they do?
I would suggest put an end to this.
Okay.
Comments we have. Otherwise, you're not.
Yeah. Okay.
You said it. You're thinking it.
Okay, so moving on, we have committees formed. We'll leave the others as need be. Returning back
Census stuff.
to any more that where we are.
On committees?
No, one, just home rule charter drafting, what would you recommend we be doing next?
Well, we're going to, Patty was discussing a demographic or a sense, almost like a database building committee, but I'm not sure how to, if that's our job or,
Looking at.
well, there's been, what, you mean wards? I mean, there's been expressed, there was somebody.
An expression for districts or wards.
There was I heard representation. That's
Government.
Yeah.
Well, I would think would be discussed next. the
Yeah,
next
that's gonna be
meeting.
part of the governing body structure, then you may develop an ad hoc committee from that.
Okay.
If there's enough consensus to move that way, or if there's a consensus to get more information to move that way. Because that's a complicated subject, especially on small scale.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, I don't know that we necessarily need to form a committee on that right now, but considering that the districting option could potentially extend the timeline or not extend the timeline if we opt to, I do think it's important that we at least begin to hash a little bit of that out, because that affects when this goes up to vote potentially. But like I said, I don't think we need to form a committee on that tonight, but I do think we need to be acutely aware of that fact.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, I would suggest we leave that for the next meeting.
If you need it, it's an ad hoc, so
Yeah.
if it's, that's literally the translation, right?
Yep, there we go, and if we need it.
If we need it, at the time. The last thing I will say is we are working on something along these lines. If it works, we'll know at the next meeting. What it is
Is it like
kind
a-
of
Can I
a,
see it?
well, it's just, I'm just showing you what it is. It's,
Showing
we're
the
gonna
format,
it-
showing
it-
the format.
Not yet.
Format, yeah.
I was gonna
What it is
say, I
essentially,
really
this is a guide,
see it.
okay? And you're gonna each
Okay.
get one of these in a file format. And all it is, it's a discussion enabler, facilitator. For example, under the mayor category, similar to what we passed out early on in July. Remember, we
We had that long
listed the
thing.
different powers of
Right,
different
the
governments.
matrix.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the different kind of governments and the different things that, how they treated an executive. And essentially, we're going to have, the example is the mayor, explain what the mayor's powers and duties are under the third class city code and the optional plan A. And then, real simple, in the next column, you want to revise it, you want to keep
Right.
it, and let's work our discussion. What do you, and literally, these 2 pages will probably take 2 meetings, between 3 meetings, between the mayor and the council. And once that's developed, you move into appointed officers, other elected officials.
Right.
And then you work your way into the
Okay.
departments, you work your way into the budgeting and finance component, the ordinance component. Things that the government's going to need to operate far into the future without setting policy, but setting parameters, okay?
Right.
Now, will the public engagement committee be putting information out or asking the public about the mayor and the mayor's role and how they feel about that?
No, we're gonna have to start
You're
talking
gonna start talking about
right?
that? Okay.
I mean, to be realistic logistically, to do any kind of survey or to plan public engagement, we are not necessarily going to be able to reach the high bar of best practices, because best practices would say we need 9 months to develop a plan before we even implement it. And we've got less than 9 months to do everything. So we've got to like be realistic about what we can get done. And hopefully we can get it done at the time frame we need to get. One of the things I think is important is from the committees is to identify what feedback do we need? Because we can't really create a plan until we know what feedback we are asking from the public. So I think that is one thing for all the other committees to keep in mind as you're doing your work. There's something you feel, well, we think this is the way it should go, but maybe we should ask the residents. We need to understand what feedback we want to hear, because otherwise we're just throwing darts out into the wind. So I think that's important.
When it comes to public engagement, you are the ultimate public representatives. You know, you're not asking to be led by the public, you're the public's representatives here.
Right.
You all
So we
ran, the
gather
public put their trust in you.
information.
So, the public engagement has to be, I think, more one way towards the public, explaining your decisions, and secondarily, them responding as they want to your decisions. And that may be one-on-one as you work your way through the community, even community leaders or citizens groups.
And I'll just note, it's one of the reasons that you have public comment at both ends of your meeting.
Right, to get,
So keep in mind, you have a public comment at the beginning. So people here could have listened to this whole meeting, decided, I don't want to comment tonight, I need to think about it. 2 weeks from now, come back, and at the introductory, for the first session of public comment, is give you thoughts that you can consider as you go through your deliberations. You also have public comment at the end, so, you know, hey, look, I just heard you talk about this, folks, can you think about these things that you might have missed or we might want you to have? There is public engagement built into every one of your meetings. I encourage your committees to do the same. Obviously, there's a public comment requirement, but engagement is also a two-way street, and you can utilize the system that's already set up to allow you to get feedback. And just wanted to make sure you guys understood that.
Please make sure you note we have a feedback form.
I guess I was
Even
just
like
a little confused about the Public Engagement Committee, what their purpose would be if we're doing open public engagement and one-on-one. I thought that was something that committee would come up with and say, okay, we're going to survey 200 people in Lancaster City and see how they feel about the government.
Yeah.
And
That
I mean,
could be
based
one of the
on like
things.
maybe our committees that were set up so that can start happening. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, but I agree. That's
That's
what
what
I'm
you're
talking
looking
about.
to
But
do?
I also
Okay.
think the committees have to
Say too.
this is what we've learned, and here are some questions we have. Figure out how to formulate that to ask the public so we can get some feedback. Like, I don't know what your committees are going to come up with.
Right, so we should be reporting back to you what
Some
we
ideas.
discussed to
Yeah.
get some public feedback.
Yeah.
Very good.
And also, I would hope we would survey more than 200 people.
Yeah, I just threw out a number that came off my head. I would too, definitely.
Yeah.
But,
But it's also for the life of the commission,
Yes, right.
because at some point, you're going to
It's gonna
want to
be the
have
public forum.
public forums.
Yeah,
Yes.
right. So-
Much like you had your regular open
Right.
meetings,
Right.
and you'll decide at what point, well, here's what we decided to this point.
Yeah.
Present it. And then at the end, as you get into the summer and educational period into the election, you're
What's
going
that
to
is?
have to
Yeah.
design the public,
We're
you
gonna
have a
assign
requirement to educate.
everyone to go to every fair over the summer. Work a table.
thinking about that.
You know, physical is great.
And the other question I would ask is, we only use the newspaper. Are there other means that we should be looking at to advertise our meetings? I mean, you know, we rely on the newspaper and posting it in there. Is it that we could have it on the Spanish radio station announced?
We can
And
always
I don't know if that's
double
part of public engagement. That's why I was trying to get a clarity on.
I would say this
where
is
that
something
goes.
that you should bring up at the committee.
That goes to the Public Engagement Committee.
And I would say that, yes, that's something you, as a committee, can choose how else you want to advertise. The advertising that I'm talking about is the
Is the-
newspaper,
was
because that's the legal
requirement.
requirement under the Sunshine
Right,
Act.
okay.
I will say that the city also posts them on the city's website under our calendars, so there are some things that we're doing, obviously, to assist.
Right.
But if you want to go above and beyond that or come up with creative ideas, I think that's what your committee should be doing.
Yeah, because I hear the
Yeah.
tourists plan that we're getting ready to take, that's being announced everywhere on the radio. You hear it, and I'm like, wow, we don't hear nothing about the home rule, but we hear a lot about that, and it was like, oh, we should be doing something like that.
Hiring
Like I
sign
said,
spinners.
one of the first things you'll decide.
And then I just want to ask a question real quick. I remember I think we brought this up at a past meeting, but I'm just curious. Do we have permission to use Engage Lancaster for these processes? And like if we want to survey residents?
So the city can make some of its engagement tools available. When the commission comes back with a plan for what it needs to use them for, then we can put you in touch with appropriate staff to see how that can be merged together.
Okay. Yeah, I just want, because like, we should be at as many events as possible in some capacity, but digital also helps a little bit.
Okay, so moving on. Is there any other aspect you'd like to bring up right now, or?
No, I think we're well situated to start. It's going to be an intense 6 months.
Yeah.
It's going to be.
So the document, are you going to provide it before the next meeting or at the next meeting?
Yeah.
So we'll get it out to you in the next.
It's ready to go now, but we didn't want to.
We'll get it out to everybody in the next few days.
Yeah.
If we can get a start on this.
Yeah, I'll send it to you and then you distribute it.
Okay, so moving on to other business. Is there any other business for the commission, for the good of the order? Yes.
So what, when do we need to have a conversation about our budget for the remainder of this process? Do we need to start that now, at our next meeting?
I have no idea. I'm not sure.
I think we just started the conversation.
Well,
I mean, we have a budget for the entire, remind me where our budget is.
your budget is, and I'll defer to Barry, but it's being partially funded by a state grant. So that budget is being developed. It was developed back in August. We gave you the
You never
draft budget.
finalized a formal budget.
Right.
And you're not required to until actually the end, which is the odd part about the state statute.
It's actually a report of expenses. It's not a report of budget.
Hearing what I've heard tonight, and again, I'm here to help guide. Decisions are yours. I think given the engagement committee, given some of the things that you're thinking about, that it may make sense to pony this into maybe not the next meeting, but the meeting after, when you've gotten a little feel. And the reason I say that is, depending on where you're going with a couple of seminal decisions will impact what you may need to do with or without your budget. So one of the seminal decisions is, the voting issue and word voting. That has some definitive cost implications. You've formed a finance committee. What you're looking for from budgetary matters may have a cost implication. So I think it makes sense for some of those committees to get a little started and for you to get past the next meeting or two, and then to bring the budget back in after that.
This is a weird question, but I'm going to ask because you mentioned budget. What would happen if, let's say a business or nonprofit entity was interested in having us more engaged on a subject, and they're like, hey, we'll spend money for this thing? How would that fall into any sort of report of
You
expenses?
report that in the final report. Barry's right. There's not really a requirement to have a budget, okay?
Right.
You had to have one because it was part of a grant application, so they needed to show how much you plan to spend, right?
Okay.
But the law requires you to give a accounting of the expenses and your sources at the end, okay? So our fee would be in there, advertising, I can send you an example. I can bring it, but it's a notarized, the chair and I guess the vice chair notarize it. It gets notarized as a true copy of your expenses, but it lists, in your case, nonprofits, they could be in kind. So that could be in kind. The educational component going towards the election could be estimated.
Right.
Anticipate to be spent. But all you're doing is showing the citizens what you do with their resources. Because the city is required by the act to fund you.
Gotcha.
So, quick question. Like we were saying, we should be at all the fairs. A lot of the fairs require a fee to set up a table. Is that something how would that be decided?
Well, if they gave you the table, then that's an
If
in-kind.
you give it a table, that's
Right,
fine. If
but-
not, it's the city's obligation to fund your work.
Okay, so
So again, I think the budget is a little bit of a misnomer, but I do think it comes back to some attention a few meetings from now, when
Okay.
you've gotten a little further along in what it is you want to do, so that we can bring the procedures that the city has, because, I mean, Ms. Bird, as you're well aware, there's a lot of procedures for getting money out of the city for good reason. You guys have studied that, right?
Yes.
And there's a lot of people involved in it.
Yes.
And we want to make sure that we do it the right way. So I do think it makes some sense to postpone the budget reporting talks, what we want to spend resources on, until you're a little further in your discussions, just based on what I've heard this evening.
Okay, thank you.
Any other business? Okay, any other public comment? Tim, now is your chance to ask every question you want.
Actually, I have one, and that is probably for PEL, and that is, what is considered best practice in terms of preparing the commission's final report and recommended timeline for doing so? If we think about the research portion, we're already about halfway there, and presumably wait until the end of August or early September is not the correct answer.
Well, the final report, in a sense, sums up what the commission has decided to educate the public on and why the charter is in the form it's in. So in a sense, the Public Engagement Committee and the Preamble Committee are starting to write the report now, okay? Most reports that I thought were most effective literally took the charter and explained each article, why they came to those conclusions. And the public report, it's a final report which contains the charter. So if you just put the charter out, it's not doing a service to anybody. You need to educate, and your final product is the final report. And I've seen them where they include PowerPoint presentations that were given at public forums, so that there's always a record of what they did. So when the election is coming and the citizens want to understand why they're voting, how they're voting, they can read the final report and make it readable and accessible. And the most important part is explain why you did what you did. You know, when there's an ethics commission, you explain that we don't have an ethics problem in the city, but we have a state law that maybe needed to be tailored for our use. And we have a more local situation. And simple as that. And that is your explanation why you should vote for the charter.
Mr. Cross, if I may, I think you've also built in, if I'm correct, you've built into the proposed schedule for drafting this charter to essentially conclude the drafting in late July, to leave essentially the entire month of August to work on
the report.
Yeah,
you're targeting, if we're targeting November of 24,
I said we're creating our own set of Federalist Papers.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. But they're electronic, because Tony's gonna, right? We're gonna have that big void of information where all the digital stuff breaks down. Targeting November requires the board to notify the county, the commission, to notify the county 13 weeks before the election, which brings you to sometime in middle of August. So the vote to say this is where we're going has to be done by that time. And then you have 60 days counting back from the election to complete the charter. So in a sense, the final report has to be done August and September. And modern political campaigns, because that's what you're going to run, an education campaign, they get started after Labor Day. And that's when people start to pay attention, so.
Thank you.
So you're right, that's the schedule.
Okay. And I just have one more question. So when we're going over this charter, are we going to go by articles, or are we just picking out sections that people are raising as we're working through this?
We're going to go
decide.
Well, pretty much that's what we're going to decide next meeting. We'll be starting with form of government and then deciding what to go next.
Yeah, I guess with objects, the form of government, the governing body, what is that composed of? Who's on it? How is it selected by the citizens? And then you move into their powers and duties. You'll have to.
So we don't go over powers and limitations.
You'll need to know what.
Because that's article. I'm just saying. 'Cause that's before the mayor. That's why I say, are we going over this the way it's wrote? So I understand.
Ms. Bird, I just wanted to point out that I don't know if this makes you feel better or worse, but they did give us this like work plan, and it basically says meeting 1, meeting 2, meeting 3, meeting 4. And so, for example, meeting 1 is what we just covered. Meeting 2 and 3 describes a conversation first on the legislative body, and some things that Ms. Rufo is interested in.
Right.
4 and 5 talk about the executive of the city and on down the line.
Right, and that's what I was asking, because I think at the beginning, I suggested that we go through the article and say, okay, we have nothing to discuss, so we're not missing items, because if I looked at that, they kind of picked out different sections that they wanted to address, and they didn't address every article in the charter.
Well,
So like.
the charter could be anything that we want it to be, and it could be in technically any order we wanted it to be in. And I can't speak to the like overwhelming wisdom of this order, but it seems like a reasonable way to get to everything you want to get to.
I think you're also missing the document that Mr. Cross is referring to that you'll
That
have
he's
before
going
the
to give it
next
to us
meeting.
next week,
which-
so I'll hold off.
This is,
until-
again, remember, the charter is broad.
Right, I
right?
understand.
And you're going to start at a big umbrella, and the same thing's happening here. You've got a schedule of broad topics, and what Mr. Cross is going to be presenting to you before next meeting is taking that into more detail, which will be all the various subcategories that go into those broad topics, again, to assure that you don't miss anything that you think is important.
PEL, I actually have, I've told you I might have some work for you. I have a request. Could we actually get 2 timelines made? One where we don't, like, let's just hypothetically say we are interested in going with districting. Could we get a timeline generated of how it could affect the process? And like, for example, we were talking about September or August, September for running that education campaign. Like, if we went to districting, does that give us more time to educate? Because I think at a prior meeting, we said it pushes it to the primary election, right?
So
Doesn't necessarily.
it doesn't necessarily. You have the option, if you choose to go with ward voting, to get 2 extra months to complete your process, essentially. So right now, you're in a 9-month process. If you elect to go to ward voting, the state legislature gives you the option to take 2 extra months, because to do ward voting requires a series of population studies, mapping studies, et cetera, that are all fairly detailed.
Because
That
we'd
is
have
not
to
some-
have the
not some-
ward, we'd have to have the districts
Yes, you have to have the-
described in the charter.
Correct. You don't have to elect that option to take a 2-month extension. It's something you have the option to do. If you take a 2-month extension, you are beyond the November election.
Right.
Which means you are to the May election,
Okay.
the next general election.
The reason I just bring that up is because I do understand the relevancy of having a high turnout election be where the sort of vote occurs, but high turnout elections can often lead to people who may not choose to educate themselves in what's going on. So I think education really does need to be one of the most important things we consider, and I just want us to be aware of what we could potentially do with extra time. Not saying we should or shouldn't take it, but we have a pretty engaged public here in Lancaster, and I don't think that the general necessarily the end all be all.
I would suggest that we do everything possible to not change a November election on
And
this.
every-
I think that has been promoted throughout
And
this
every-
whole process.
And every voter is entitled to their opinion, and just because they don't show up in the polling booth with complete information doesn't mean that they shouldn't be there to make a choice.
No, sure, I say that, I just want to say, I'm also saying that as someone who doesn't vote in primaries.
Okay, I will say, I think we're moving way beyond where we should be right now. I want to get back to
Sure.
public comment and finish up this meeting, and what you're saying is very important for the next meeting.
Right, that's why I was asking to just see some potential generated timelines of what it could look like.
Yeah, so we can, I think it's a good point for moving on. Mayor Sriracha, did you have a comment you would like to make? Or?
If this is public comment?
Yes.
There? Okay, so I just wanted to say, as we were talking about timelines, just to give a little overview for the budgets that we're preparing for the city going into 2025. So to Mr. Dastra's point, if there was an extension and we were then into May, we would not have any new anything until 2026. And so that's just something for you all to keep in mind, because that directly affects our budget preparation that we are beginning much earlier this year, because ostensibly your process is communicating to us that we need to have a budget with home rule, potentially, and a budget without home rule. And we are going to be preparing two budgets simultaneously. And I just wanted the commission to be aware of the steps that we're taking to prepare for different scenarios. And we will be able to provide more detail as the process goes along about what those scenarios are. But that's just to give you a context. So that's all I wanted to announce.
Thank you, Your Honor. Yes.
So, for the mayor, so if, what Tony was saying about going to districts, how that would affect the, budget, if we do not, I just want to get an understanding, if we do not put the home rule on the November ballot for a vote, would the city then be in bankruptcy? Or you're going to readjust the budget that we're not there?
No, and it really doesn't have to do with whether or not you pursue ward voting. It has to do with whether or not you take a 2-month extension.
Okay.
And so that is really the critical factor, Ms. Bird, because if we're in that process, we are then, we will have to make different decisions related to expenditure cuts and tax increases for another year into ostensibly 2026.
All right, thank you.
Any other public comment?
Judah Hoover, Government Affairs Committee of Elkhart. I just want to say, as a citizen, what I saw here today, copious notes, and with a few minor exceptions, this was very encouraging.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, is there a motion to adjourn?
Make that motion.
One thing, just for the good of the order. Your books that you all receive, there's a whole section on charter drafting. It's probably not a bad idea to read it, to get a flavor for what other commissioners did, what the process is. We try to follow that process, so it's in your books.
Thanks.
Thank you. Motion to adjourn, is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?